What's good, everybody? Today we are tier listing every single roster move in the Call of Duty League on the year. So we were talking about in the podcast, like, man, there's been a lot of roster moves this year. And I'm like, how many have there been? And let's just say there were a ton. And so I was like, yo, I'm gonna tier list all of them. And that's what we're doing today. Obviously, some teams have more than others, but it's gonna be a blast going through it. I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's get right into this one. Let's go. Alrighty, so we have 26 roster moves to get through today. So this ends up being like a full-on tier list, which is a good time to say the least. And we'll try our best to get through this thing as fast as possible. Who knows? I haven't pre-listed these things or anything. This is completely off the cuff, off the dome, freestyling it, and it's gonna be wild. So first one, we're gonna be going in chronological order. I have them ordered chronologically. And the first one on the year was the Parasite for Zero on February 9th. The London Royal Ravens original roster was Zed, Zero, Alex, and Dylan. They brought in Parasite off the rip. Of course, he wasn't in the lineup for that long. They end up bringing in Paul X here pretty soon. We'll talk about it in a second. I would say this was maybe like a D. It's either a C or D tier move. Again, I have no basis for why these players are going to be where they're going to be before we get more of them in the list. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going to leave it in the D tier for now. You know, he came in, played for a few weeks on two 2-week contracts, maybe a month or so. They were fine, but it wasn't like any massive improvement with their team. And Zero, the roster happened because of COVID and Zero's traveling issues, which was unfortunate. And so, in an ideal world, you could have Zero still playing, because I think he's a really talented player. So another Royal Ravens move is up next, Zed for Alex. And honestly, this was a pretty good move. This made them a lot better and actually really competitive for a while. Man, I don't think it's quite an A tier roster move, but we'll put it in the B tier for now and see how that feels. But I think that one makes a lot of sense. That was a really, really solid move. Zed played really well when he came in there and really helped change their team. So Paul X then came in for Parasite. And similarly, this could be an A move because, snagging a guy like Paul X, he's been a long-term, really talented player, and it seems like he's going to be on the roster next year. So I'm honestly willing, because again, he's a guy that he's going to have a long-term impact in the CDL, and I'm for sure going to be on a roster next year, where Zed, it's still TBD whether or not he's going to be on a roster next year, and probably not going to be on London's roster next year, more than likely, because of that, the long-term effects of Paul and how talented he's been as a player. I think it's an A tier move. They really did a good job with Paul, and he's been great. So the next player on the list is Insight for Methodz. And obviously, this is the definition of an S tier move. Not because Methodz sucks, but because of how freaking great Insight has been. Obviously, in my last tier list video of all COD pros, Insight obviously is a freaking beast. And one of the best players in the CDL on the year. And he's going to win Rookie of the Year. And he's going to be a cornerstone for the Ultra, probably for at least next year. And we'll see what happens moving forward, but probably for a long time as well. That's an S tier move. So we have our first LAT roster move, and this is Temp getting subbed out for Venom. Obviously, we're going to be seeing a lot of LA Thieves on this list. Venom came in and was a little bit underwhelming at the start. And, throughout the year, it was always kind of like, man, we really want to see like a dominant Venom, like what we saw on Wester in the AM scene, but it never really came to fruition for him to be as dominant as he would have liked. And so with that in mind, I would say this is probably like a C tier move or maybe a B tier move. I think Zed improved the London team more than Venom improved LAT. And so because of that, I think we'll keep him in the C tier. The next move, though, this is the definition of S tier as well. That is Standy in for Major Maniac. Obviously, we'll talk more about Major Maniac a little bit later, but Standy, of course, is, if Insight didn't exist, would easily be the Rookie of the Year. So, we all know how good Standy's been. This was kind of the first domino that needed to fall for them to kind of unlock Priesta and allow Priesta to play as an AR with a Krig. They experimented, obviously played really, really well off the rip with Standy when he joined the lineup. They won 3 or 4 straight matches. They beat Optic in there, and they had some really nice wins with Standy in there. And overall, Standy is an elite player in the CDL, top 10, as good as it gets. And we'll see what happens at Champs. He could easily find his way inside the top 5 or top 4 if he plays really, really well at Champs too. So There's a lot riding here for Standy, and he's just fantastic. He's so good. So Draza for Slasher is up next. This is interesting because, again, we've talked a lot about the podcast, talked a lot about on the channel as a whole about how good I think Draza is, or how I think Draza is a very good player. I don't necessarily know if subbing out Slasher ends up being the best decision for him, considering they ended up bringing him back. But again, this was before we knew for a fact if Lan was coming back, and it didn't seem like Slasher wanted to play online. So all of that to say, it gets pretty tough to kind of grade these. I'm going to put this one in the C tier because, you know, Draza ends up getting benched eventually anyway. Actually, no. We're going to put it in the B tier because they end up being a really good team for a little bit there because their dominance on checkmate with Draza when he gets subbed in. So we'll put it in the B tier, and because of how good Draza is individually. But I think we'll probably have bigger moves. He'll be higher up on the list later. So Havoc for Slack is the next move up. Now we're in April, so this happened on April 11th. So we're kind of moving our way through the CDL season now. This was an interesting move because it maybe made them slightly better, maybe a little bit more consistent overall. It didn't create more upside for this team, you know? I would go with a C tier move probably, where it just made them slightly better with a little bit of change, but nothing that was drastic enough without obvious massive improvement. Havoc's been real solid though, and you gotta like what he brings to the team from an intangibles aspect, but obviously they've been struggling lately, so tough to say. So now Temp in for Fire. So Fire, of course, started the year with Paris. Then after Temp got benched by LAT, he heads over to Paris to join that roster. So this was also a tough one. I would say this is a B tier move to give him a little bit more upside. Overall, Temp's been a better player than Fire. It makes the team a lot better. So Hydra, now, of course, another just elite move here with a player to bring in who's as good as it gets. Hydra, at the beginning of the year, was supposed to be in their starting lineup, but of course, he had the visa issues, so he couldn't get to the United States right off the rip. And then he finally did get to the United States, played in the amateur scene for a while, and was dominating while still learning English in the amateur scene. And, you know, he came to them New York Subliners. They end up getting top 2 at stage 3's major. They had every chance to win it too. They came from the winner's side. Bringing him in literally elevated NYSL to a whole nother level. And we've seen the individual talent that Hydra has. I really do think that he's a top 5 player in the CDL right now, even though the Subliners aren't performing. They're with a new roster now, of course, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well with DiamondCon. Hydra does everything around the map for this team, slaying at an elite level, really playing some quality search and destroy too, which I thought might be a question mark heading into the year, but we've seen some big time improvement from there and some situational awareness from Hydra. Anyway, that was a great move, S tier move for sure. So Zaptius comes into London for Dylan, and overall it improved them for sure, but not as much as you would have thought it would improve them. And then of course Zaptius ends up getting dropped later. So I would probably go C tier, where maybe we saw some minor improvement, but nothing drastic to take them to another level. Although Dylan was not playing very well. I mean, he was having a tough go at it in the year. So you could say, because of how bad Dylan was struggling, that he could be down, that you could make it a B tier move just because of that. I'm gonna leave it in the C tier for now, but I could move this one later depending on what else ends up here in the C tier. So now we got Chino for Vivid. This is interesting because the reports were that Vivid basically benched himself, asked to be benched because he didn't want to play with his team anymore and wanted to get traded. So then we had the rumors that he was going to get traded to Seattle, but then that fell through. And then there was a whole bunch of rumors all over the place. But then, of course, he ends up going to Dallas, which we'll talk about here in a few moves. Chino played really well. And so I don't want to call it a D tier move, even though we've seen how talented that Vivid has been with Dallas. But I'll leave it in the C tier as well, where maybe it helped their team chemistry and allowed them to be a little bit more consistent, but they definitely did not make them that much better as a team, and that's why they end up making a change later anyways. Then we had, of course, in the fallout of all this, we had Fellow and Huke, this whole situation where the Huke situation started, which this was April 22nd now. So just a few days later, we're having a lot of moves. So from February 9th to April 22nd, we've had 13 moves already. This is where Huke, we have the whole situation, Huke gets benched and they bring in Fellow. It didn't really make them better at all. It probably made them worse. So I would say it was a D tier move just because it didn't make that much sense. But then we found out later, I mean, like the past few weeks, that it was because they were trying to get Clay from the NYSL to fill in for Huke and play with 2 ARs, move Illy to SMG, and it would have been Shotzzy, Illy, and then Clay and Crim as their 4, and that's why this was a messy situation with Huke and with Fellow. Overall, didn't really make them that much better. The roles didn't make sense for their team where, you know, you had to, Illy just on the SMG ended up not working out, and so really them getting Vivid here in a few moves made him just that much better and more consistent. And so overall, see, I would say about a D tier move makes the most sense. So now Decimate gets signed by the Surge to replace Looney. So on the surface, it made sense because of how well Decimate was playing in the amateur scene. The problem is that how this ends up finishing is that Decimate then ends up benching himself here in a little while. So it's tough because the idea of the move makes a lot of sense. I would say it's probably a C tier move. But then how it actually ended up working out, probably a D tier move. You know, could you have made it work with Looney? Probably not for the upside of their team. Then you bring in Classic and that makes a lot more sense. So overall, I'm gonna call this a D tier move just because of how it ended up working out. But the idea of it wasn't that bad. So I could see it being a C tier move, but both of them would be acceptable. I think it's probably one of those fringe ones on the C or D tier. So now this is where it starts getting messy. Now LAT trades for Huke. This was on May 4th. Oh yeah, because we had the, you know, May the 4th be with you and Huke Skywalker and Kylo Kenny. I mean, this was a weird situation, obviously, where they bring in Huke, then he gets benched like what ends up being a few weeks later, and it all goes downhill real quick. And then now we know how it ends up finishing is that Huke's not even in a starting lineup anymore. So that's where I get a little bit hesitant to be like, okay, you know, what's this? Where do you rank this? I mean, the idea of it is really good. I like the idea to bring in Huke, but they barely gave it a chance and they shut it down real quick. And so how they dealt with the move didn't really impress me overall. Like on paper, I like the move, and having like a Huke, Draza, Kenny duo or trio, I mean, would, you know, on paper makes a lot of sense, and that team's really talented. So if that was the case, I'd put it in the B tier. But then how it worked out, it ended up being an awful move, and they paid a lot of money for Huke not to use them. Now I'm like, well, maybe it just ends up being an E tier move because they traded for Huke and then they don't even use him. So I'm gonna put it in the E tier because of the fact that they paid a lot of money to trade for Huke, and then within a few weeks weren't even using him. Because of that reason, we'll put him in E tier. Now we got Major Maniac in for accuracy, and off the start, this looked like a, I don't know, C tier move where maybe they had slight improvement, but then it kind of was a net 0. But now, after Major 4 or Major 5 and seeing the value that Major Maniac brought to the team in in-game leadership and communication and overall that stability, and really actually some upside in playmaking too, this is an A tier move. This is an A tier move. Really, really good decision to make. In the hindsight, when it happened, I was kind of like, maybe. It just kind of depended how it played out with the chemistry of the team. And that was kind of the big thing I highlighted, that it's hard to say because we don't know exactly what the chemistry of the team was like when they made that move. But overall, obviously it made sense in the long term for what the Rocket were trying to do. And so A tier, I think, makes a lot of sense for us and what we're trying to do here. So now we got the trade for Vivid Dallas. This is either an S tier move or an A tier move. Obviously, this is when Vivid is acquired by the Dallas Empire and he replaces Fellow. And this happened on May 20th. So we're moving up in the year a little bit now. Wow, is this an A tier move or an S tier move? This is tough. This is tough. I think this is an S tier move overall to pair Vivid's playstyle with Shotzzy, and it provides them a lot of S&D upside in the long term. I don't even know if we've seen the full upside of what Vivid can do with Dallas and with Crim, and how that could work as an SMG duo with Shotzzy yet, with both of them playing their best CoD. I mean, we saw the best glimpse of it, obviously, at the stage 4 major when them finishing second to FaZe, forcing a game 9. But yeah, I think this made a lot of sense for this team. Ended up working out great. Crim has done a lot of good stuff with Vivid to kind of mold him and teach him some of the more fundamental ways to play Call of Duty, especially inside of Respawn. And so hopefully we can even see more upside for that over the next few weeks here heading into Champs. So now we have Zaptius heading to Paris for Classic. And overall, this was basically a lateral move for this team, if not negative. You know, there was just no upside really acquired with this move at all. And really what ends up happening is the next move is that Classic goes to Seattle for Decimate. So these two are pretty linked together because they're basically back to back and happened on the same day, kind of announced on the same day at least. And overall, I would say maybe it's either D tier or C tier, where there's just not much improvement overall. I'm going to go with a C tier move where, you know, it was fine. And they had, again, really the only map mode combination where we thought we saw some improvement was like APOC hardpoint. But then they go to the LAN and they get absolutely smoked by Seattle on APOC hardpoint. So it's like, you know, okay. At that point, how important really is it? I don't know. So this is a fringe C D tier move. I'd have no problem with somebody putting this in the D tier, but probably I'll leave it in the C tier for now. So then we have Classic to Seattle. Made them better. Honestly, a pretty solid move. And we've seen now, I mean, Nikki D on land's a whole nother beast. And, you know, for that sake, I kind of want to put in the A tier to kind of see the upside. And really, it was a low key move that made them way better. And so because of that, because it caught me by surprise, and I wasn't exactly sure if this would make them any better at all. And if I was tier listing these moves when it happened originally, I definitely would have been wrong. I would have said it was probably a C tier move. But yeah, overall, Nikki D really fits in with this roster, even though we've seen, again, highlighted the inconsistencies in S&D, and it's taken a while for this roster to kind of find their groove. But on LAN, they showed up and they showed out. They beat FaZe. So, I mean, how is this not an A tier move with Classic coming in and now knowing what we know? So overall, Classic did a great job of that. Now we get a whole bunch of basically LAT moves from here on out. So we got Tej in for Huke now. This was for a little while there where they were trying to figure out exactly what this would look like. And then here in a week or two, we end up having Huke coming back in the lineup. So yeah, on May 24th, they brought Tej in for Huke, and then Huke comes back in on June 9th. So this move, D tier, I guess. It didn't really work out for him, and they only played for a week and a half together or whatever. So not a great move in hindsight, to say the least. Then we had one of the biggest moves of the year. We actually had the only 2-player moves, and then we had them in back-to-back team acquisitions here. So this was the move that London made, which was Afro and Alex for Zed and Zaptius, which is interesting because, again, if they would have just done Afro for Zaptius, this would have been maybe an S tier move, probably an A tier move at least. But Alex just has not been great. He's had a few moments where it's been very good in like one series, like on a checkmate hardpoint, where you're like, oh man, here's the potential we've been waiting to see for Alex, but there's just been zero consistency. Afro, on the other hand, has been a legit breakout player, a guy who's going to be on their team next year, a legitimate fundamental piece with probably him, and I hope at least him and Paul X as like a core 2 to really build around, because I think there's some legit potential with those two as teammates. This move's hard to judge because they have one really good move, and then Zed should have been in the lineup still. So it's kind of one not great move. So I'm between the B and C tiers because of the long-term impact. I think I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and put it in the B tier because of Afro. This is the long-term play, signing Afro, moving him to the starting lineup, seeing what you got with Afro, and seeing how good he's been here in stage 4, stage 5 since they made the move. Overall, just because of that alone, at least gives it a B tier move, even though Alex has not been the right decision. Afro enough in himself levels up that move. So we're running out of space here already. Actually, give me a second because I'm gonna move these things closer together. Alrighty, we got a few left here, and this one's the other duo move, the two big 2-player moves of the year. And this was the very interesting move of Huke and Slasher in for Draza and Venom heading into the stage for Major LAN with the first LAN of the year. I mean, because of how it ended up playing out, I mean, this is either a D tier move or an E tier move. I mean, obviously this is where Huke ends up missing the event, and then Draza, the next move is that Draza comes in for Huke. So this happened, within 1 week of each other. Slasher coming in was a solid move, and so just because of that, I'll leave it in the D tier because I think Slasher was the right call to bring in here for heading into the final few events of the year. But then we brought in Draza for Huke, and overall, I would call this an A tier move because I really do think that Draza is the real deal with how good he's been playing, and just overall, just seeing his upside inside these matches with the squad. Really, really impressive. I think you found a guy, like LAT found a guy that they can build around. Just a great move overall, and we'll see what happens with this roster moving into champs. And you know, maybe this could be an S tier move if they end up finishing like top 3 at champs. And Draza plays really, really well. That's easily an S tier move at that point. And so we'll see. And now we got Mental in for Chino. So I would think most people would say this is automatically an E tier move, but the only thing I would say is because of the perspective from LAG, where like you had to make a Hail Mary to have a chance to make champs. You basically had to finish I think you had to finish top 2 at the state. You had to go 5-0 and then either win or finish top 2 at the stage 5 major to make champs. This move happened on June 21st. And again, like I said, they had to make some sort of Hail Mary move to even have a chance to make champs. And so that's the argument for it not being E tier. Overall, it definitely made their team worse, and it didn't show any upside in the time that they ended up having for stage 5. So because of that, I'll leave it in the E tier, but I could understand somebody making an argument for being in the D tier or maybe a little bit higher, just because what else were they gonna do? They had to make a change. And we got 2 left. That's John in for Tiege. A solid move, one that needed to be made, but John has yet to be like the X factor that a lot of us hoped that he would be. And so with that said, I mean, you know, that's why I'm underwhelmed overall, but still I think it's a solid move that needed to be made. And John can still be a big time contributor for this team. And again, if John goes off here at champs and they dominate, then maybe this could move up into the A tier or S tier, depending on how great John looks. For now, I think B tier makes a lot of sense, where it probably made them better, but just a little bit better. So now we got one move left, and this is Diamond Con for Clay. This is tough to grade because it was another move that didn't want to happen for the team and that Clay kind of forced to happen. And so I don't really know where to put it. I guess I would say E tier because they would be way better they would be a top 3-4 team with Clay there, and they are the 8th team with Clay not there. And Diamond Con got put into an impossible situation having to come in for Clay. So we'll see. I mean, the other move that could potentially happen would be Clay coming back in for Diamond Con. And we've heard some reports that, you know, he was streaming 8s and maybe he was scrimming with the team earlier last week, but we don't actually know whether or not if he was in the lineup or not. So we'll see. But that would be the other move that could potentially happen. I guess if that happened, then it would be a great move, but kind of whack that neither of them should have ever happened in the first place. But again, if Clay needed to take the time for himself, then so be it. So that's totally fine. If he truly needed to, then that's fine. So guys, there it is. That is the roster tier list, or the roster moves tier list of the 2021 year. We ended up with 26 roster moves. We actually got this thing done in under 30 minutes, so I'm pretty happy about that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Drop all your comments down below, your spicy comments about some of the other moves that happened throughout the year, maybe some that you thought were good or bad or horrible or great, whatever. Drop all your comments down below. Twitch.tv/SalvationsElite. I stream a lot. I do the gaming channel, which uploads are coming the next few days on the gaming channel as well. So be on the lookout, and a community league highlights videos coming out this week as well. So be on the lookout for all those things. But again, if you guys enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you guys really enjoyed it. But as always, guys, I'm your boy SalvationsElite, and we will see you next time. I'm out.